So I'm actually filming in a little bit of a different location. This is our seed starting room. I wanted to start the video here because I want to kind of break down basically the essential tools and items that I use that I think I would not be able to have a really good functioning garden without. So this is going to also include things that you need to start a garden from seed, because that is primarily how I get my plants. So let's jump right into it. I've got a bunch of stuff in front of me now. I'm not currently using my seed starting room because I have my greenhouse and it's warm enough outside, but basically every February I start things in here. So some of the essential things that I use include like some kind of thing to put your soil and your seeds in. I use seed starting trays, like 72 well trays. You can also use like little cups, just some kind of small container to start your seeds in. You'll also want a good seed starting mix. I have a bag of seed mix here. I've also started to play with making my own seed mix, but if you're a beginner, I would just start by picking up a bag of seed starting mix. You really want something that's fluffy and light, has good drainage, and is also like without other seeds. So just starting with soil from the ground somewhere probably isn't the best idea for starting seeds, because there's probably seeds from other plants out in the wild that could cause issue and grow. So start with something that's, I don't want to say sterile, it's not like medically sterile, but sterile of other seeds. So I'd pick up a mix or start with a sterile mix of your own. The other things that you will probably want if you're starting seeds are artificial lights. I just literally have like desk lamps that I primarily use. It's kind of a janky setup, but it's most of my seed starting actually happens in a greenhouse, so I don't want to currently invest in any additional lighting, but you're going to want lights. The other thing that I found really useful this year is a heat mat. It literally just plugs in and provides a warm surface for your seeds. That's really what starts germination, is warmth, water and warmth. Oh, and then the last thing that you need for seed starting are seeds. Just to my left here, I've got my little containers all full of seeds, but here are all my flower seeds. You're gonna need seeds to start. So containers, things to start your seeds in, starting mix, the seeds themselves, and to give an additional, support for growing, maybe a heat mat, lights. You could also add like a little fan to kind of have an artificial breeze that helps the plants be a little more sturdy. So that's all for our seed growing room. Let me take you outside. So now in the greenhouse, I've got a couple of other things that kind of include personal safety and comfort as a gardener. So the first thing you want to have is really sun protection. I'm not wearing a hat now, but you want to have like a wide-brimmed hat while you're out in the sun gardening. I like a good pair of like Carhartts. I wear the Carhartt classic working pants. You're going to be getting dirty and kneeling, so you want something kind of tough and sturdy. A good pair of gardening gloves. I really like these. I think these are simple, like they're from the Miracle Grow company, just something with grip and protection. If you have roses or thorny plants, you may want to get a pair of rose gloves. I can show you what those look like. I've got a pair of gloves for thorn protection that I wear here. If you harvest some turnips, they will sting you. I sometimes get kind of little stingers from zucchini and like squash vines. Cucumbers can be kind of pokey, so if you have sensitive skin, these kind of rose gloves are a little more protective up your arm for vegetables, but also for thorny plants like berries, roses, things like that. The other thing that you're going to want more for comfort is something to support you when you're kneeling and sitting in the garden. So I've had this for like ever. It's just like a kind of like a thick foam mat that you can easily carry and bring with you and kneel on when you're gardening. The other thing that I have is a toolbox that kind of doubles as a seat, which is nice to have in the garden. So something to sit or kneel on or support yourself. You can also get like knee pads that sometimes construction workers will use. I've seen gardeners use those kind of knee pads, so that way you don't have to carry something around, you're just wearing them. And what else? Oh, a good pair of work boots. You don't always have to have like fancy work boots. It's not like you're necessarily always going to be doing like heavy labor, but I wear Bloodstone boots, and they kind of suit me really well. You don't always want to be wearing like sandals or open-toed shoes when you're working in the garden. Not only do you just get like dirt on your feet, but also sometimes you're doing like shoveling or dealing with rocks and things like that that could be kind of dangerous. So I would wear a closed-toed shoe at least. So the next category of things that you want to be considering and making sure that you have in stock as a gardener are soils, good soil and soil amendments. So you kind of ideally want to have a good starting soil. For me, I live in a really rocky area, so that meant bringing soil in. I purchased soil, kind of like basic ground soil, not topsoil, like just kind of the next quality up from topsoil from a local distributor, and they were able to deliver that as soon as the ground thawed in the springtime, and I use that mostly to fill beds, as well as some soil from back in the forest, basically in the woods. I needed to do that just because our soil is so rocky. So you want to have a good starting soil, a loose, nutrient-rich soil. You'll also likely want to amend that soil. You can have your soil tested. I haven't actually done that yet, which is probably something I should do. You can get your soil tested, and that kind of gives you the best idea of what you may need to use to amend your soil. But often you need different amendments for different plants, including nitrogen-rich material, phosphorus, and potassium-rich material. Those are all kind of basic nutrients that most plants need. I use organic soil amendments where there's like kind of equal amounts, or something like bone meal, which has a lot of potassium in it, or does it have phosphorus in it? Phosphorus. Has a lot of phosphorus in it. Root vegetables like bone meal. Blood meal is good for nitrogen. So basically, if you don't have your soil tested, look at your plants and see what type of nutrients those plants need, and you can get some amendments for them. Usually you need amendments for your soil. The other thing you want to kind of be prepared for is weed control. I don't use any sprays or anything. I just hand weed and use mulch. Definitely consider some kind of mulch, whether it be wood mulch, like sterile hay. You can use grass clippings, you can use newspaper. That's kind of a whole nother video of what you might want based on the plants, but highly, highly recommend using some kind of mulch to prevent weeds. So now we are out in the vegetable garden to show you some of the tools, like the large tools and some of the smaller hand tools that I use pretty regularly in the garden. So the one that I have in my hand here is just a standard garden spade. Excuse me as the bugs fly in my face. It's just a shovel with kind of a pointed edge. I use this all the time for digging large holes if I'm transplanting like a perennial flower, or even just to kind of dig up and help break up the soil in my garden beds. Very handy just in general. Great for the chicken coop, a regular spade. Additionally, I would recommend a garden rake, which is a little bit sturdier than like a regular rake for leaves. Looks like this. It's got curved tips, tipped sort of prongs, and they're short and quite sturdy. It allows you to sort of rake up and till up the soil. I use this to even out my soil after I've kind of turned it over and added amendments to it. Okay, I'm going to try not to step on any of those things and have the handles knock me in the face. The next kind of large tool that I use pretty frequently is a hoe. Again, this is great for tilling up the soil, aerating compost. This is a big, these kind of big tools are used a lot in the beginning of the season and when you turn over the beds. Where's my pitchfork? Here's my pitchfork. My pitchfork is primarily used in my compost. I can use it too to like, you know, turn over bedding with the chicken coop. But in terms of gardening, I use a pitchfork, a large pitchfork, as well as these little handy smaller pitchforks, mostly for compost. The smaller one works well in the beds as well. Okay, actually, honestly, now that it's in front of me, having a regular garden rake is handy too, especially when I live in a place where the leaves fall down and scatter across my lovely garden space here, raking up after we mow or use the weed whacker. So a garden rake is handy too. Or a regular leaf rake is handy too. In terms of sort of small tools that I use, most frequently I'm using a garden, you know, like a little hand trowel. I use this a lot for when I transplant things into the garden, when I'm scooping seed starting mix into trays or containers. And then also, this is like, I don't know the exact name for this, but this is a bulb placing tool. You kind of like wiggle down into the soil and get like a perfect little cup out of it. This is great for placing anything that's a bulb, really. I can use garlic, potato starts I can use this for, flower bulbs. This is actually a really, really handy tool for bulbs. I think it's specifically designed for that. The other thing is my pruning shears. I actually have to sharpen these, but these things are super, super handy. I have them almost always in the pocket of my cargo pants. I'm using this to prune everything pretty much, unless I have like something really woody. I'll use my bigger pruning, you know, shears for it. But these guys are super, super handy. You do need to kind of regularly sharpen them. Mine are getting a little bit dull. A regular old pair of scissors is also kind of pretty helpful to have. There are certain things that I don't really want to be using these for, like cutting twine, for example. So I have a regular pair of, you know, kind of heavy duty scissors to do things like cut twine, I don't know, cut plastic. I don't always want to be dulling my pruning shears, so I'll use regular scissors for those tasks. And then the other thing, it's not so much like a tool like you would think, but having buckets is really, really helpful when it comes to transferring compost over, or you know, collecting your garden veg. You know, having various random buckets and containers is helpful. The other things that are not necessary but very helpful are wheelbarrows, and that's like a standard wheelbarrow, the orange, and then we have our larger gray one that's called a Vermont cart. Those have been really essential in having like a big garden space, transferring over soil when we have the soil delivered, mulch when that's delivered, filling it up with, you know, leaves and putting that in compost. I mean, there's like a laundry list of things that we use those for, so those are really handy tools to have as well. So the next kind of category of things, it's kind of a small category, but it's irrigation. It's a small list of things, but it's actually really, really important. How are you going to irrigate your garden? This can look, your irrigation can look very different based on what your garden setup is, and I actually use a couple different methods here in the garden. Depending on the time of year, it differs. So most of the time you need a garden hose. So we just have a couple of different garden hoses. One of them is a drip hose. There's like a really long sturdy hose that goes out to the greenhouse that irrigates that during the warmer months. An attachment that I found really, really helpful to my hose is this really long handled attachment that I can adjust at the base here, that allows me to water my plants without having to bend down really far. I can reach pretty far down with this tool, and it's made watering a lot easier when I'm using a garden hose. The other thing that it's pretty easy and handy to have is just a regular watering can. You can fill it up at the spigot and carry it with you. This can get a bit cumbersome when you have a lot of plants to water. This next category of things, which is the last category of things, I'm putting under like plant protection and support. So that includes like actual physical support, which let me just take you around the garden and show you what I mean. So many varieties of plants, especially ones that are vining, need additional support, meaning they need to be able to grow up something and have a physical support there. So for tomatoes, I recommend these green, well, mine are green, but T-posts. They're metal T-posts that you hammer into the ground. They're super sturdy. Any plant that vines up really tall and gets really top heavy, especially if it doesn't really like spread out and is one kind of tall vine, I recommend the T-posts. I'm using T-posts for almost all of my tomatoes, and they're pretty well supported. The other kind of support that we'll use are bamboo stakes. I've got a bunch of bamboo stakes holding up our additional like tomato plants, as well as keeping our Brussels sprouts upright. They are not as good for things that are really top heavy because they themselves will probably get pulled down in a big gust of wind, but for something sort of shorter but not strong roots like Brussels sprouts, bamboo stakes are really good and useful there. The other kind of support that your plants may need is something like fencing or paneling, trellising, something like that. I have 2 cattle panels in my vegetable garden, or sorry, they're actually technically hog panels, and that's that silver grayish metal there that's holding up my pole beans. They work really, really well as archways. They're not the most glamorous looking, but they're super, super sturdy. I had butternut squash growing up them one year and it didn't budge at all. So it can hold livestock, it can hold your plants just fine. Another thing that you may want to sort of protect your plants is row cover. I don't currently have any row cover on my plants because it's currently an okay enough temperature for them, but row cover could be something like plastic sheeting to protect plants from the harsh cold, or something like shade cloth to protect them from the heat. My goodness, I had to come back into the greenhouse. I was getting eaten alive by gnats out there. The last sort of protection that I have for my plants includes pest control. Now this is kind of a controversial topic among growers, or it can be, because you know, some pest control is damaging to the environment. I guess as a disclaimer, have a completely organic garden. It's not like certified organic, but I don't put any damaging pesticides or non-organic fertilizers on my garden. That's just kind of something that I believe in and feel kind of strongly about. I don't want to be feeding myself or my family anything that could be harmful to us or to the environment. So you may ask, like, what do you do in terms of pest control? Well, there's kind of 2 big categories of pest control, and those are, like, I call them like micro and macro pests. For your macro pests, those are things like deer, groundhogs, chipmunks, could be birds if you have berries. For those I use like physical barriers. So you saw in the garden we've got a wood fence that goes all the way around it. That was just luck because we had dogs that used to run around in there. But putting up fencing, you can use electric fencing. We also line our vegetable garden with like metal mesh, pretty hardy, what is it called? Construction mesh. It's like, you know, a square, or about 1/4 of an inch thick, or like, you know, holes about 1/4 of an inch, and it goes all the way around the bottom of the fencing, so that way it kind of better deters groundhogs from climbing, or from digging. You know, we'll see how long that prevents groundhogs from coming in. They're not like stupid, so we'll see how that lasts, but something to prevent groundhogs, like a physical barrier, has been really important for us in our garden. We've got a family of groundhogs that lives here, unfortunately. The other thing, if you've got, If you have like birds and chipmunks trying to go after your berries, you can use netting. We always have netting over our blueberries. We do wire kind of cages out of that standard like inch wide metal fencing. We wrap it around each individual bush, and then we lay netting over top all of that. It's kind of extra, but we had a great harvest of blueberries, and we had birds definitely try to investigate, but they couldn't get in. So those are macro pests. For micro pests, I in the past haven't been as good at kind of managing them. My biggest macro pests are squash bugs and caterpillars like the cabbage moth and the cabbage worm, I guess, from the cabbage moth. This year I started using BT spray. Where's my BT? Here it is. This is an organic spray. Look, it's covered in dirt here. But it is a bacteria that, let me try to explain this in a way that makes sense. It basically kills the caterpillars when they try to eat the leaves if the bacteria is sprayed on them. So it's not a pesticide that will kill pollinators, which is really really important to me. I'm like a big fan of pollinators. Obviously we all should be. And a lot of pesticides that are out there also harm our beloved pollinators. So this product only affects the caterpillars, or the pests that eat the leaves of the plants. So I spray this on my brassicas. So all everything that basically the cabbage moths lay their eggs on, as well as I've been spraying it lightly on my tomatoes just to prevent tomato hornworms from eating them. So far, so good. I've had really bad devastation from cabbage worms before, and the BT has done a great job this season. The other kind of micro pest that I have encountered, aside from bugs, like literal insects like your squash bugs and your caterpillars, are fungus. So I see fungus on my roses and my cucumbers, I would say, where I have the most issue with fungus, especially this year with all the rain. So I very conservatively use this copper fungicide. It's also certified for organic gardening. I don't have as much knowledge of funguses and how they function and how this prevents them, but I have sprayed this on. I've seen the most benefit with my roses from this. I have that like black rose fungus that I've noticed when I spray affected leaves and the rest of the plant that the growth is slowed from using this copper fungicide. So those are all of the things that I use in my garden. We covered personal protection, everything you need from seeds starting to what you might need for harvest, protecting your plants from micro and macro pests, what you need for irrigation, what you need for soil amendments. We kind of covered it all. So those are kind of the main things that you need to have a functioning garden and a successful harvest. There may be additional things that I forgot about, but those are kind of my core things that I could think of. If you have any questions, you can write a comment, and I'll also put a list of all the things that I had listed in the little description box. All right, hopefully this was helpful. Best of luck and happy gardening.